Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you love, and in that moment, you saw nothing but pure desperation? The kind of desperation that comes from hunger. Real hunger, not the kind where you're just waiting for dinner to be ready, but the kind that gnaws at your soul, day after day, until you don't even remember what it feels like to be full. Today, I want to share with you a story that will shake you to your core. A story of love, of pain, and of a heartbroken grandparent who witnessed their own flesh and blood fighting to survive, one piece of leftover food at a time. This is the story of my granddaughter, bruised, starving, and eating scraps to fill a void that should have never existed. Before we get started, take a second to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and leave a comment below. Your support helps more than you know, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the story I'm about to share. I've noticed only 98% of you who watch haven't subscribed. Come on, guys, show some love and support. Thanks a bunch to those who have already subscribed. It was a cold winter evening when I first noticed something was off. I had just gotten home from a long day at work, my legs aching, my mind exhausted, but nothing could prepare me for the scene that unfolded in front of me. There, in the corner of my kitchen, was my granddaughter, Lily. She was barely 11, but in that moment, she looked so much older. Her clothes were too big for her, hanging loosely from her thin frame. Her hair, usually a vibrant mix of chestnut curls, was tangled and unkempt, as though she hadn't seen a comb in days. But it was her eyes that haunted me. They were sunken, hollowed out from lack of nourishment, with dark circles that made her look like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her skin was pale, almost grayish, and there was an emptiness in her gaze that tore at my heart. And then I saw what she was doing. She was eating scraps, leftovers that had been tossed in the fridge earlier that day. It wasn't much. Some stale bread, a few scraps of chicken, and a half-finished bowl of rice. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she was scavenging these scraps as though they were the only thing left in the world. She was eating them with a sense of urgency, a kind of desperation I had never seen before. I called out her name, but she didn't even look up at first. I could see her trembling, but she kept eating, barely pausing to catch her breath. When she finally looked up, the sight of her face, the bruises on her cheeks, and the faint outline of cuts near her lips, nearly made me collapse. "Lily, what's going on? Why are you eating like this?" I asked, my voice trembling with concern. She hesitated as though weighing whether to speak at all, and when she finally did, her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I was hungry. I didn't want to wake you." But I wasn't angry. I was scared. How had it come to this? How had my beautiful, energetic granddaughter, the girl I had raised with so much love, become so broken? To understand Lily's pain, we have to go back a few months. Lily's parents, my daughter and son-in-law, had been struggling for a while. Money was tight, bills were piling up, and tempers were flaring. My daughter, a single mother for the most part, was doing her best to keep everything together. But I could see the cracks in her facade. She had always been the strong one, the one who never asked for help, but I could see how hard it was on her. She worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet, and even then, we often found ourselves scraping by. But things took a turn for the worse when my son-in-law lost his job. The weight of everything seemed to break him. He became angry, distant, and even worse, abusive. He wasn't violent at first, but the emotional toll he took on Lily was more than I could bear. I remember the first time I saw Lily's bruise, the one on her arm. It was subtle at first, just a faint purple mark. She told me she had fallen, but I knew better. I could see it in her eyes. She was afraid to tell me the truth. Days turned into weeks, and the situation only got worse. The abuse wasn't always physical, but it was always there. My son-in-law would yell at Lily over the smallest things, belittle her, make her feel like she was nothing. And my daughter, she was too scared to leave. She didn't want to break up the family, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness and her daughter's. I tried to intervene. I spoke to my daughter, begged her to leave him, to take Lily and come stay with me. But she refused. She said she couldn't afford to live on her own, that the apartment was too expensive, that she couldn't do it without him. She was trapped in a cycle of fear and dependence. And no matter how much I tried to help, she kept turning me away. Things came to a head one evening, right before the holidays. I was visiting them when I noticed Lily wasn't acting like herself. She seemed smaller, more withdrawn, like she was trying to disappear into the walls. That's when I saw it, her ribs. For the first time, I noticed how prominent they were beneath her thin shirt. I asked her if she was eating enough. She hesitated, then admitted that she wasn't. There wasn't enough food in the house, and the little that was there was often saved for her father, who was growing increasingly irritable and aggressive. Lily had learned to keep quiet, to make herself invisible, so she wouldn't be the target of his frustration. And her mother? She was too tired, too beaten down to even notice the signs of her daughter's suffering. That night I went home and called my daughter once again. I told her it was time to get out, that if she didn't, I would take Lily in. I didn't care if she was angry. I didn't care if it broke up their family. I had to protect her. And for the first time, my daughter agreed. We packed Lily's things the next day. It wasn't much, just a few clothes, a couple of books, and a stuffed animal she had carried with her everywhere since she was little. When we left that house, it felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that things wouldn't be easy. And they haven't been. The trauma Lily experienced, emotional, physical, and psychological, was deep. She couldn't just forget it. She didn't know how to ask for help. She didn't know how to be a kid anymore. The first few weeks at my house were hard. Lily would sit in her room, hugging her stuffed animal, lost in her thoughts. When I'd check on her, I'd find her curled up in a corner, her eyes hollow again, her stomach growling because she'd forgotten to eat. It was like she couldn't trust that there would be enough food for her, even though we always had plenty. Her instincts, honed from years of hunger and deprivation, were hard to break. It was then that I realized something. The scraps she'd been eating in that kitchen weren't just food. They were a symbol of something much bigger. They were a symbol of her survival. She had learned to feed herself, to hold on even when everything around her was falling apart. She had learned to survive, not just physically, but emotionally. And it broke my heart that this was the reality she had lived in for so long.